Welcome to International Management, the podcast that breaks down the core challenges and strategies of global business. Based on Orlando Casabonne's scripts for his international management class, each episode offers practical insights, clear strategies, real-world examples, and expert guidance to help you navigate complex global landscapes. For additional resources, visit casabonne.com. Now, let's dive into the essentials of international management.
All right, let's dive deep into intercultural communication today. We're going to be looking at this guide on international management, trying to tease out some of the really key takeaways. Things that can help anyone, whether you're, getting ready for a meeting with colleagues overseas, or just if you're fascinated by how culture shapes how we talk to each other.
Yeah, it's interesting. We often don't realize just how much culture impacts communication. Even something as simple as like a nod.
Oh, yeah, totally. You think something like a nod is universal, right? But the script actually points out that a nod can mean you agree in one culture, and then in another culture, it just means like, yeah, I hear you.
Right. And if you misinterpret that, suddenly things get really awkward really fast. And that's just one tiny example. The guide talks about cultural noise. These like disturbances or distortions that pop up when people from different cultures try to talk to each other.
So cultural noise is like almost like static on a radio. It makes it harder to get a clear signal.
Yeah, exactly. Like if you think about that German word Gemütlichkeit, you can't really translate that feeling, that cozy, content feeling into English.
No, there's no equivalent, really.
Right. It's a perfect example of how language itself can be cultural noise. And then you've got nonverbal stuff, too, like giving a thumbs up.
Right.
Which we think of as positive, but in some cultures it can be really offensive.
Oh, wow. Yeah, I can see how you could easily send the wrong message without even knowing it. The script also talks about humor, like British dry humor. That can completely fall flat in cultures where people communicate more directly.
Oh, yeah. Humor is a minefield when you're dealing with different cultures.
Yeah.
What we find funny is so tied to our background and our culture, right? So a joke that's hilarious to one person could be totally confusing or even offensive to someone else.
It makes you wonder how many times we've all, made those cultural blunders without even realizing it. But before we get too lost in all this noise, the script really stresses that trust is so important, especially in intercultural situations. But of course, trust is built and expressed differently depending on the culture, too.
Oh, for sure. So like direct, open communication that builds trust in some cultures, but in others, people value subtlety and indirectness.
Huh, interesting. So something that seems totally trustworthy in one culture could actually be misinterpreted in another one.
Absolutely. It's almost like everyone's speaking a slightly different language, even when they're using the same words. And then the script talks about this massive research project, the G-Lobe project, which looked at how culture impacts leadership and communication, their main finding. Cultural values really shape our communication styles and expectations, even in business.
Oh, that makes sense. So what are some examples of how those cultural values play out in the real world?
Well, the G-Lobe project found, for example, that the U.S. has a high performance orientation. They value achievement, assertiveness, all that. Whereas in Sweden, they put more emphasis on collaboration and equality, less focus on assertiveness.
Yeah. I can see how that would make a big difference in how people approach things like negotiations or decision-making.
Exactly. So if you try to use a really assertive American-style approach with someone from Sweden, it could backfire pretty spectacularly. It underlines how important it is to understand those cultural nuances.
You can't just impose your own cultural norms on everyone else. That's a recipe for disaster.
Yeah.
And speaking of potential disasters, the script highlights the dangers of stereotypes and assumptions. It says that generalizing about an entire group of people, stereotyping, or assuming you know why someone's behaving a certain way just based on their culture, attribution, can completely derail communication.
Yeah, stereotypes and assumptions, they're like mental shortcuts, right? They oversimplify things and lead to misjudgments.
Like, say, assuming that Scandinavians are cold or aloof just because they tend to be quieter. That totally misses the point. They might just value contemplation and careful listening.
Right. And you can't forget about individual differences, too. Just because someone is from a certain culture doesn't mean they'll fit perfectly into that mold.
It's like you could misinterpret a Japanese employee who's quiet in a meeting as being disengaged, when really they might be showing respect for their superiors or carefully considering their response. It's all about trying to understand the why behind people's behavior, not jumping to conclusions based on stereotypes.
Absolutely. We have to move past those simple assumptions and engage with people as individuals. Cultural background is just one piece of the puzzle.
Exactly. And it's not just about personality either. Things like language, the roles we play in society, even social structures, all of that is connected to culture and affects how we communicate.
For example, you've got the Indian caste system. It was officially abolished, but you can still see its influence in how people interact. Or think about Japan, where communication tends to be very indirect, especially when it comes to criticizing superiors. It reflects their cultural values of respect and harmony.
So there are all these layers to consider. It's not just about the words we say. It's about a whole web of cultural influences. And we haven't even gotten to nonverbal communication yet.
Oh, nonverbal communication is a whole other can of worms. It's so important, but it's often overlooked.
Yeah, that's true. Like a simple headshake can mean completely different things in different cultures. You could end up with some major misunderstandings.
Absolutely. And it goes beyond just gestures. Think about personal space, eye contact, touch, all of that. The way we communicate nonverbally can make or break an interaction, especially across cultures.
It's like we're all speaking different body languages. Oh, we'll definitely need to unpack that further because the script makes it clear. Understanding those nonverbal cues is crucial, especially when you're navigating different cultural contexts.
Oh, for sure. Those unspoken signals can sometimes speak louder than words. Welcome back. As we keep digging into this whole world of intercultural communication, let's go back to that idea of cultural noise for a minute. You know, those subtle things that can really mess up communication.
It's like you're talking to someone, and you're both speaking English, but somehow the message gets lost along the way. We talked about how our cultural backgrounds affect how we see things like gestures and even trust. But the thing that really stood out to me was nonverbal communication. That seems like a huge part of it.
Oh, absolutely. Nonverbal communication can be even more important than the words we use. It's fascinating. Take eye contact, for instance.
Yeah, eye contact.
In some cultures, if you make eye contact with someone, it means you're paying attention, you're showing them respect. But in other cultures, it can be seen as aggressive or confrontational.
Oh, wow, I see what you mean.
You might be trying to be sincere, but the other person thinks you're challenging them.
It's like you're trying to have a conversation, but you're both playing by different rules.
Exactly. And it's not just eye contact. Think about physical touch.
Right, like hugging or shaking hands.
Some cultures are all about that, very touchy-feely. But other cultures prefer to keep their distance. What might seem warm and friendly in one culture could be totally inappropriate in another.
So you have to be really careful.
Yeah, you do. Like in Japan, bowing is the customary greeting.
Oh yeah, bowing.
And even the way you bow matters. The depth of the bow, how long you hold it, all of that communicates something different.
It's like a whole secret language of bowing.
Mm.
It's amazing how much we rely on these nonverbal cues to figure out how to act around each other.
And those cues, they can mean totally different things in different parts of the world, like personal space, for example.
Personal space, yeah.
In some cultures, standing close together when you're talking is normal. It shows you're comfortable with each other. But in other cultures, that would be way too close for comfort. People need their space.
So you might think you're being friendly, but the other person is backing away from you, thinking you're invading their bubble.
Mm.
And speaking of different paces, let's talk about time for a second. Monochronic versus polychronic cultures. It's wild how our sense of time can affect everything, from how we schedule meetings to when we expect things to get done.
It really does. In monochronic cultures like Germany or Switzerland, being on time is super important.
Oh yeah, I've heard about German punctuality.
They see time as this linear thing, like a precious commodity that you shouldn't waste. Meetings start and end on time. Everyone sticks to the agenda, no messing around.
Right.
But in polychronic cultures, like in Latin America or many Arab countries, time is more flexible. It's less about rigid schedules and more about going with the flow.
So you could have a German executive trying to schedule a meeting with someone from Brazil, and it could be a total clash of cultures. The German is getting frustrated because the Brazilian is late, and the Brazilian feels rushed and pressured by the German's need to stick to the schedule.
Exactly. And it can cause a lot of misunderstanding and frustration if you don't know what to expect. It's not about one culture being right or wrong. It's just that they have different ways of thinking about time.
So being aware of those cultural differences is key, right?
Yeah.
You need to communicate your expectations clearly to avoid problems.
Absolutely. But it goes beyond just understanding other cultures. We also need to be aware of our own biases and how they might be affecting how we see things. our own biases.
Yeah, we all have them. They come from our background, our experiences, all that. And they can influence how we interpret people's behavior, how we judge them, even how we communicate with them. Like, for instance, someone from a more hierarchical culture might not feel comfortable disagreeing with you directly, even if they don't agree with what you're saying.
Oh, interesting. So you can't just assume that their silence means they agree.
Exactly. You need to make sure everyone feels comfortable speaking their mind, regardless of their cultural background. It's about creating an inclusive environment where everyone feels valued and respected.
It's not just about tolerating those differences. It's about appreciating them. All those different perspectives, that's what makes things interesting, right? It leads to more creative solutions and helps us see things from different angles.
Exactly. We have so much to learn from each other. Now, before we move on, I want to touch on something we mentioned earlier, the Arab world. It's a great example of how cultural values are woven into communication styles. Yeah, you mentioned their emphasis on hospitality and emotional expression. Tell me more about that. What makes communication in the Arab world so unique?
Well, one of the first things you'll notice is their incredible hospitality. Guests are treated like royalty. It's all about showing respect and making people feel welcome.
It's not just about offering them a cup of coffee, right? It's about creating a warm, welcoming atmosphere.
Exactly. Personal connections are everything in Arab culture. It's not just about what you know, it's about who you know. Building those relationships, sharing stories, showing genuine interest in the other person, that's all crucial for effective communication.
It reminds us that communication isn't just about exchanging information. It's about connecting on a human level. And you mentioned the Arab world is also very expressive, emotionally.
Oh, absolutely. Their language is full of metaphors, imagery, storytelling. They value passion and eloquence, which can be very different from the more direct, factual communication style you often see in Western cultures.
So what might seem over the top or exaggerated in one culture could be perfectly normal in another.
Right. There's no one right way to communicate. It's about understanding and respecting those differences and appreciating the beauty of all those different ways of expressing ourselves.
And that appreciation is so important, especially in today's world where we're all so interconnected. The more we understand these differences, the better we'll be at communicating and building relationships across cultures.
It's about seeing our differences not as barriers, but as opportunities. Opportunities for growth, learning, and enriching each other's lives. Now, we've talked a lot about the challenges, but the script also gives some practical tips for actually improving our intercultural communication skills. How can we take all this knowledge and put it into action?
Yeah, that's the big question. What are some concrete steps we can take to become better communicators in a multicultural world?
That's a great question, and it's one we'll be exploring in depth in the final part of our deep dive. We'll be looking at specific strategies for overcoming cultural barriers, real-world examples of successful intercultural communication, and practical advice for navigating this increasingly complex world. So stay tuned for all of that.
All right, welcome back. We've been on quite a journey exploring intercultural communication, haven't we? We've talked about cultural noise, those nonverbal mishaps, even how different cultures see time itself. But let's get down to brass tacks. How do we actually use all this information to become better communicators across cultures?
That's the million-dollar question, right? It's one thing to understand the theory, but putting it into practice, that's the real challenge. But the good news is the script gives us some practical strategies for bridging those cultural gaps and really connecting with people from different backgrounds.
Okay, I'm all ears. What's the first step?
Active listening. And I don't mean just, hearing the words. It's about really engaging with the other person, trying to see things from their perspective, even if it's different from yours.
So putting aside your own judgments and assumptions and really trying to walk in their shoes.
Exactly. Listening with empathy and curiosity, understanding that their way of communicating comes from their culture, their experiences. We have to be aware of our own biases and not try to force our own cultural framework onto their message.
And it's not just about the words, right? You have to pay attention to body language, tone of voice, facial expressions, all those nonverbal cues that can add so much meaning.
Absolutely. And remember, those cues can mean totally different things in different cultures. A gesture you might think is friendly could be seen as disrespectful in another context. So active listening means paying attention to both the verbal and the nonverbal.
Active listening, got it. What else can we do to build those intercultural bridges?
Well, think about your own communication style and how it might come across to someone from a different culture. If you're someone who's very direct, who likes to get straight to the point, you might need to adjust your approach when you're talking to people from cultures that prefer a more indirect style.
So it's about adapting your communication style depending on who you're talking to. Kind of like learning a new dance. You have to adjust your steps to match your partner's rhythm.
I like that. And that adaptation might mean being more patient, asking clarifying questions, or even using humor to break the ice and build rapport.
Speaking of humor, that seems like a potential minefield. What's funny in one culture could be totally off limits in another.
Humor is so culturally specific, it's really hard to get it right across cultures. When in doubt, err on the side of caution. Stick to humor that's unlikely to offend anyone, and watch for those nonverbal cues to see if people are getting the joke.
It's a delicate balance. But even if you're trying your best, misunderstandings are going to happen, right? What's the best way to handle those awkward moments?
Be patient, be understanding, and be willing to learn. Remember, everyone's coming at things from their own cultural perspective. Misunderstandings are inevitable. It's how you deal with them that matters.
So instead of getting defensive or blaming the other person, take a step back and try to see where the communication broke down.
Exactly. Ask questions, acknowledge the miscommunication, and work together to find a solution that respects everyone's point of view. And sometimes it might even be helpful to bring in a cultural mediator or a translator to help smooth things over.
It's all about recognizing that we're all learning, and even those misunderstandings can be valuable lessons in cultural awareness.
Absolutely. It's not about being perfect. It's about being open to new perspectives and always trying to build those bridges of understanding.
It's about seeing our differences not as obstacles, but as opportunities to grow, to learn, and to connect with each other on a deeper level.
Couldn't have said it better myself. The more we embrace the richness and complexity of human interaction, the more we realize that communication is so much bigger than just words. It's about building relationships, understanding each other, and celebrating all those different cultures that make our world so vibrant.
That's a great note to end on. So, as you navigate the diverse landscape of human interaction, remember what we've talked about today. Be mindful of cultural differences, approach every conversation with curiosity and empathy, and never stop learning.
And who knows, maybe along the way you'll find that the most rewarding conversations are the ones that challenge you to step outside your comfort zone and see the world through a new lens. Until next time, happy exploring.